reading. Our study of the new man. I got more love. More love. That's what everybody needs. More love. I wish you guys so much love. Just be present. Let the words pass through you. Hear whatever you want to hear in this. It's not even important what it's saying. Just let the words pass through you. He's saying something. It'll resonate with what you need to hear today. You can't see the ocean where I walked down to. There's a canyon in the ocean. Let's see if you can get a good view. Alright. Notice that the mother of Jesus is present, representing his former level, where developmentally he was before, with which he is still in contact, but he has nothing to do with it. To the formal level of himself, he says, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" To understand his rough attitude towards his mother, it is necessary to look at some other passages in the Gospels. Let us suppose a man reaches a level at which self-pity, all that is pathetic in him, has been destroyed. So at which self-pity has been destroyed. Many people regard Christ as a pathetic figure, a sick Christ. This conception of Christ usually goes with the view that he was brutally treated and dragged to the cross. Of course, everything in the Gospel shows quite the opposite. We see this in psychology as well. I'll just briefly say. That we view other people where we are. So if we're in a lack mentality and feeling like, we let people walk all over us, or we walk all over other people, then we imagine that Christ is operating that same way. Because we're seeing the world through our experience, through our eyes. We're not at a different level to see it at a different level. Sometimes we can see higher, but it takes inner vision or getting into your higher mind or higher self or whatever you want to call it. This conception of Christ usually goes with the view that he was brutally treated and dragged to the cross. Of course, everything in the Gospel shows quite the opposite. The Gospels show that he deliberately suffered on the cross. He predicted his crucifixion. He told his disciples that he had to undergo this fulfillment of his end. And although he prayed in the agony at Gethsemane that this end might be altered, calling it a cup that he must drink, he said, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." To take him as a pathetic figure is beside the point. The sentimental Christ is an invention. It is obvious that he was harsh in his handling of others, many of whom he offended, and he was harsh with himself. In the scene with Pilate, it is shown that if he followed his own will, he could escape. He says to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power over me except it were given thee from above." Oh, that's in John 19:11. I thought it was 11:11, but it's 19:11. It's XIX 11. I wasn't looking at the extra X, but anyway, but he deliberately plays the role allotted to him and carries it out because this was the aim that was set him to fulfill. And so he often explained. The disciples did not understand, and only later some of them grasped the idea of the whole drama of Christ enacted visibly before them, namely, the inevitable crucifixion of a higher level of truth at the hands of those on a lower level. It's like you can't handle the truth. It is like that. It's like they couldn't handle that higher truth because they were only seeing Christ at a lower level as a threat to their government or as a threat. Lower love doesn't like higher love when it doesn't want to go there. It's scared of it. It crucifies it. Either that or our ego gets crucified, you know? I was praying the Lord's Prayer the other day, and I was saying, deliver me from evil at the end, and I was like, deliver me from ego. It just came out because I try to do it in a mindful, present state. That's just what was there today, that day. All right. At the hands of those on a lower level, the destruction of psychological truth by literal truth is the continual drama of human life. Jesus says to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come." This suggests that eventually he will be destroyed by what the mother represents in humanity. Anyway, we must get entirely away from any literal sense, even from any actual figure. Jesus had reached a point in his own evolution and temptation where the mother level scarcely had anything to do with him. I think we might have skipped a page. But of course, mother as Mary representing women and the divine feminine, that's different, you know. But mother as representing his child, he's grown out of that stage. But I read a mystical book where it's so beautiful. She's saying, I'm talking to you in your Adonai state, in your Lord state, your the Logos state, like all that is state. I can't remember. It's so beautiful. I just remembered it's beautiful. So it says, Maurice Nicoll, this is The New Man by Maurice Nicoll, chapter 3. The mother level scarcely has anything to do with him. That is, some level typified by mother, whom he calls woman. It no longer has power, and yet still has power, but it is subordinate. So Jesus changes water into wine, and so gives the first sign of the level of inner development, excuse me, that he has reached. The two ideas are connected: the raising of himself from the mother level, and the resulting power of turning water into wine. But it is clear from the account of the marriage feast, which is a psychological portrait, that although Jesus had reached this new state, in which he had nothing more to do with his former state, yet the former state is close beneath him and still can take power. He controls it so that the mother understands that obedience is necessary. So she orders servants, quote, servants, to obey what Jesus commands. 3 levels in Jesus are thus depicted. The lowest is represented by the servants, who obey the mother, the middle by the mother, and the highest by the new level or state of Jesus, where the mother obeys. Let us conceive these 3 states as 3 horizontal lines drawn one above another in parallel. The middle line will then represent the intermediary between the highest and the lowest lines. In other words, some definite order of level is indicated: highest, middle, and lowest. This state attained by Jesus and marking the beginning of his power of teaching is defined by the general setting of the psychological portrait in the terms of a marriage, that is, some inner union, totally different from the mother-son union, and its consequences, the turning of water into wine. What is meant in this psychological description by the idea of a marriage? What element in Jesus had come into union with some other element, with the result that water became wine and so gave the first sign of his inner evolution? In the Bible, the first truths concerning our existence and what we have to do, that is, the commandments, were written on tables of stone, as we are told, but we must recall that something apparently went wrong in the transmission of these truths from God to Moses. Moses cast down the original tables written by God and smashed them when he found that in his absence on Mount Sinai, his people had begun to worship a golden calf they had set up. It's so weird. They just were delivered from all that stuff. And Moses was just gone temporarily up the mountain. And they started worshiping something they made up. It's like a quick fix. We do that. We all do that. Okay, anyway, I'll keep reading. And Moses turned and went down from the mount with 2 tables of the testimony in his hands, tables that were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount. Some people say they were still trying to worship. They were just worshiping in the wrong way. In a way of their own making. I don't know. There's a mystery in that for sure. So that was from Exodus 32:15 or so. But then Moses was commanded by God to make 2 more tables of stone with his own hands. And he hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first. All truth coming from those who are at a far higher level of understanding of it than we are cannot be transmitted directly. So he's saying all truth. Maurice Nicoll is explaining all truth coming from those who are at a far higher level of understanding of it than we are cannot be transmitted directly. We have nothing in which to receive it. Yeah, I see. We can't receive it. It's our own vessel. It's like if you're from in a lesser vibration or a less presence is developed in you. You don't have a container in yourself to hold this higher truth. It takes time to develop this quiet. So that, and depth in yourself, I guess, or something. Higher awareness. It's a lot of surrendering to get to higher awareness. But there's not a cup in you to receive the higher truth. So we see them from our lower perspective. And we can grow higher and higher. But anyway, we have nothing with which to receive it, and so occupy ourselves with our level of understanding truth, with legal agreements, forms, and so on. Higher truth, therefore, reaches us in terms of a lower, rigid, literal truth. It is adults speaking to children. It is impossible to convey the full meaning. I think children could understand it better than the adults sometimes. Oh, look, there's a vulture, I think. I don't think that was a hawk. It's beautiful, though. I wonder if the phone timer. Hopefully it is. Just as the 10 Commandments, it is impossible to convey the full meaning. Just as the 10 Commandments had to be represented on stone tables so that the children of Israel could receive them, so the already existing truth, the water in this parable, is described as poured into 6 water pots of stone, those used for the Jewish rites of purification. This suggests that the truth was based on the ancient Jewish beliefs and customs. 6 is an ancient allegory. 6 is used very often in the book of John. The 6th hour, the 6th day. 6 in the ancient, allegory, the number, 6 is, in ancient allegory, the number of creation, or on different levels, the number of preparation for any achievement. I've heard it's also the number for reconciliation, for love. I can't remember what else 6 is. Oh, I have a book in my backpack that I've been meaning to read on symbology of numbers, but I haven't started it yet. Okay, so 6 is in the ancient allegory of the number of creation, or on different levels, the number of preparation for any achievement. For 6 days in the week we prepare for the Sabbath. A Jewish servant had to serve for 6 years before he won his freedom. A vineyard had to be pruned for 6 years. The land had to be sown for 6 years. But the 7th year was always a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land. Such was the law given to Moses. Likewise, there were 6 steps up to the throne of Solomon. Thus the 6 water pots of stone would appear to stand for a period of preparation, during which the truth, as water, had been received and held in the minds of the Jews, and had taken a form of corresponding to their ancient faith, awaiting its transformation at the coming of Christ, the Anointed One. Now in this parable, water, after having been poured into the stone jars, becomes wine. Let us recall what has been said already about these 3 stages of truth: stone, water, wine. Stone represents literal truth, and we can conceivably understand that successive transformations of the meaning are implied in these different levels of truth. What we are taught at our mother's knee may be truth, but is not our own, even though we obey it. God is a spirit. The mother is not. The authority is not yet internal, but has come from outside. It is said elsewhere that Jesus taught as one having authority. But even this, seeing the truth of truth, is not sufficient, and not only meant here. A further stage is meant, and we must seek God for the word good in order to gain an idea of the meaning. Stone, water, wine indicate 3 levels of truth, but where we can find any word comparable to good? Where can we find any word comparable to good? We find it at the end of this dynamic portrait. The ruler of the feast, tasting the water made into wine, remarks that the usual custom of the world at a marriage feast is to give the good wine first and the poorer afterwards. He was speaking literally. And when the ruler of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which had drawn the water knew, the ruler of the feast calleth the bridegroom, and said unto him, Every man setteth out the first the good wine, when men have drunk freely, and then that which is worse. Thou hast kept the good wine until now. The best wine is sometimes it's translated, but the good wine is also, we'll see where he goes with good. Now the mother had told the servants to obey Christ. Let us notice that the servants knew, the mother knew, that they had been ordered to pour water into the empty stone jars. They had access to the water, that is, the part of Jesus that was at the level of understanding. He used that lower level not directly. He used it through the intermediary middle level called mother. Here we have real psychology, something long ago lost. But the whole mind must be abstracted from the senses, the level of literal meaning, to catch a single flash from the brilliance of inner psychological meaning in this first sign of the inner development of Jesus, recorded in terms of visible imagery. Palpably false. Consider only, if these visible images meant what they stand for literally, then why did Jesus transform about 120 gallons of water into wine, as we are told? In a small village such as Cana of Galilee was, this would be absurd. Well, it might be, unless it's a number that we need to hear, or unless it's someone was saying the other day, the wedding goes over 5 days. And lots of people come from all over. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We can listen to what Maurice Nicoll's ideas are. It's just his opinion. As we are told, in a small village, this would be absurd. It cannot mean that so much water was miraculously made into wine, equal to some 600 liters, towards the end of a local festival. But it is exactly through seeing that the meaning cannot be literal that we can begin to look for another meaning, that is psychological. The representation of the psychological in terms of physical images, as in cartoons, is one thing, but the taking of psychological meaning in terms of the physical is a reverse process that continually occurs in every attempt to convey higher meaning. So Christ, as psychologically meaning, is always crucified by those who can only take in literal, sense-based meaning. A sense-based mind believes that the bread and the wine used in the ritual of commemoration of the Last Supper are to be taken literally. But the literal level of the comprehension in such matters plays havoc with us and has done so throughout the ages. A man may take the phrase, "Thou shalt not kill," literally and obey it as such. But if he sees more deeply and understands that he may be killing others psychologically all day in his thoughts and feelings. Oh, God, help us. Help us not to judge. Usually what we judge in others is a mirror of what's in ourselves already. You can use discernment, but okay, so it says, if he takes it literally and obeys it as such, but if he sees it much more deeply and understands that he may be killing others psychologically all day and ourselves, in his thoughts and feelings, he will begin to pass to another level of the understanding of this injunction and realize the fuller or more internal meaning of it. Then what he has been taught outwardly begins to penetrate him, and its meaning undergoes an inner transformation comparable at first to stone into water, and eventually, when he realizes the good contained in the command, and so has compassion, which is of goodness, it turns the water into wine. In your being, in your inner being, you have this tenderness and mercy and love, and all the beatitudes and all the fruits of the Spirit. It works in your actions, so that you're genuinely more loving. It turns the stone into water and the water into wine. We love on such a deeper level. Through this insight, he will evolve in himself, in his understanding. Individual evolution is only possible by transformation of the understanding. A man being his understanding and what he wills from it and nothing more. A man is not physical. Only psychologically can anyone individually evolve in the sense of the Gospels. Well, it's kind of like it builds up your soul's garment, your soul's dress, your soul's cloth, robe. You can call it psychological, but I'll go back to the book. Only psychologically can anyone individually evolve in the sense of the Gospels. Once a man has seen for himself the value of what he has been taught as mere command or outer truth, once the emotional side of him has developed up to whatever knowledge of truth he has, so that he seeks to do what he knows from his own willing and feeling and consent, he is then another kind of man, an evolving man, a man reaching the stage that we are taking at present as wine, a new man. One of the deepest teachings of esotericism deals with the union of the two sides of a man. In the esoteric teaching of the Greeks, exemplified by Socrates, this idea runs through the whole exposition of man as an unfinished creation of a possible higher state of himself. This reminds me of a quote I sent someone, because it's about to go into Plato. Plato calls these two sides knowledge and being. He says the true lover of knowledge is always striving after being. In the Republic. And again he says, when the soul, is stayed upon that on which truth and being are shining, it understands and knows and is seen to have reason. This then, which imparts truth to the things that are known, and the power of knowing to the knower, is what I would have you term the idea of good. I feel like a good cry. I'll carry on a little bit longer and then I'll just stop. The good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge of all things known, but of their being and essence. This is from the Republic. It says 508 and 509. I don't know which version of the Republic of Plato's. So he says, okay, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge of all things known, but of their being and essence. A man must have being in order to know rightly. Your being has to be developed, like I was just saying, The education of being and the education of knowledge was Plato's greatest theme in his later books. How to bring people up rightly and how to give them knowledge, and at what times to give them knowledge. This was the problem with which he was continually occupied. To give poor types of people knowledge that they will only misuse was a thing that Plato saw clearly as a great danger. To open knowledge of whatever kind to everyone was to him a crime. He saw clearly that many disciplines must be undergone, referring to character and being before a man was fit to be taught knowledge. That's why all the schools of esoteric knowledge, you had to pass through lots and lots of tests and levels. And in our spiritual life, this happens as well. You have to prove faithful in small ways, and then you are given more. And you keep proving to be faithful, and then you're given more. And you can still fall from there. But you're not just entrusted with knowledge. There's a lot more access to it now. We're moving into a place of higher consciousness everywhere, in a way. So it was a crime back when Plato was around. He saw clearly that many disciplines must be undergone, referring to character and being, before a man was fit to be taught knowledge. In fact, he came to the conclusion that for anyone to be taught great knowledge, he must have been trained in all the exercises and disciplines of life, until he had become of an age that was no longer that of youth. In the esoteric schools of which we can see traces in ancient literature, many very severe disciplines existed before a candidate was allowed to receive esoteric knowledge. He might have to serve in a most menial position for years, subject to insults that were a test on the side of being, basically to take down your ego. Because if your ego gets hold of these higher truths, it twists them. If he passed these tests successfully and developed in himself strength and patience, he was allowed to receive some knowledge. But if he broke, if he pitied himself, if he complained, if he was weak in his being, if he lied, if he behaved maliciously, if he took advantage of others, if he was resentful, if he thought he was better than other people, he received no knowledge. This means that the side of his being was tested first, before he was given knowledge. Today the situation is quite different. Anyone is given knowledge without discrimination. And there is a growing class of literature calling attention to this point, without the idea of the development of being as a primary factor being quite understood. For a man to receive higher knowledge, he must have good being, as he capitalized the being, to make salt in himself. Jesus says you must have salt in yourself. What good is a man if he doesn't have salt in himself? You throw out the salt if it's lost its saltiness. Just throw it out in a heap of the trash. If we regard knowledge as chlorine and being, we're talking about chemistry, I love chemistry. Oh my gosh, organic chemistry was my favorite. But the chemical chlorine and being as sodium, so sodium chlorine makes salt. So if we regard knowledge as chlorine and being as sodium, then unless a man has enough sodium in him to combine with the chlorine he receives from the outside, he will not have salt in him. Then the chlorine poisons him, because it's poisonous by itself. The poisonous power of knowledge alone, without the good ground of which the Gospels so often speak to receive it, without love, without goodness. It may simply produce world poison. In such a case, the acquiring of knowledge can only produce the worst results, as we see all the time. When people try to shove their knowledge on us and just tell us we're wrong and judge, and they don't have being, they don't follow, they don't sit in silence and welcome the divine in them, welcome the quiet, like just nature even. You don't even have to call it divine. The silence develops our being. I love the sun. Thank you, sun. That's all I'm going to read today. Wait, I'm going to read one more paragraph because then we're done with this chapter. All right, so I take back my sentence. For a man to receive higher knowledge, he must have good being to make salt in him. Okay, so we just had that. In such a case, the acquiring of knowledge... Ellipsis. In such a case, the acquiring of knowledge can only produce the worst results. But the mystery is deeper than this. Here's the last page of this chapter. The esoteric teaching about knowledge and being refers to the fact that knowledge cannot be understood unless there is a corresponding development of being. A man may know a great deal and understand nothing because his being is not equal to his knowledge. If I have all of the knowledge and can speak the tongues of angels, but I don't have love, what am I? I'm nothing. I'm nothing. If I give everything that I have to the poor and I don't have love, I'm just doing something from ego then, you know? A man may know a great deal and understand nothing because his being is not equal to his knowledge. As a consequence, no inner union, like this marriage that we're talking about, can take place between his being and his knowledge. It can't make wine, you know? We see today an extraordinary number of books full of knowledge, but with no understanding. We see the cheapest explanations given of the facts of science and religion, I would say. It's just, I don't know what to say, how, like, it's like what Jesus shows in his being is like 1,000,000 times deeper than what we learn. So when someone's trying to teach me something in religion, I try to just quiet my mind and listen to the highest truth that's being conveyed like this wind through it, so I don't get mad. And you can do that with my stuff. I'm not saying I always know what to say. I'm just saying what's in front of me, what comes through me in that moment. And pray. You can pray too. You can pray for me. Pray for everyone watching these, that ever gets them, that their being will be developed, that hearts will be transformed. Thank you for your prayer. And not only this, but he can only... Okay, so a man of poor being and great knowledge can only give out meaningless material that leads nowhere. And not only this, but he can only complicate everything and make it unintelligible. And so science today complicates everything too much and apparently leads nowhere. Countless scientists are writing papers that no one understands, not even the scientists. The reason for this is that the conditions of knowledge are no longer understood because the sight of being is ignored. Esotericism, the word eso, maybe he'll tell us what that means. Eso means outer, inner teaching. Esoteric, yeah, the inner teaching. Has always understood the conditions of knowledge. It has always understood that the knowledge should always lead to understanding and that the understanding is only possible with a corresponding development of being. This is the deepest idea concerning human psychology, for then a union takes place that leads to inner evolution. In this marriage or union, the meaning of the knowledge unites with the being of the person and leads to his inner development. This is what the parable of water made into wine is about. It means that Christ united his knowledge with the good of his being. His knowledge and the goodness of his being became one. Let us repeat what has already been pointed out, that the ruler of the feast speaks about the good wine and that the good came last. First of all, a man must be taught truth or knowledge, and then the goodness of it comes later. Actually, however, good must also precede knowledge. But of this we will speak later. What is good is prior to all truth, but in rhyme, R-I-M-E, I don't know that word in that way, it seems as if knowledge comes first. Maybe it's supposed to be in time. Maybe it's a typo. In time, it seems as if knowledge comes first. The ultimate aim in life is the good. If we say that at the summit of things is good, then It is prior to everything else, and so it is first in scale. But in time, he's saying time in this sentence, it looks as if knowledge comes first. So I think it's time. All knowledge should lead to good. Therefore, good is first in scale. Although to our senses, which are in time and only see a cross-section of all of existence, called the present moment, it looks the other way around. Good, truth, knowledge. When we look in our present moment, it might look the other way around. Maybe I'll explain this more next. Yeah, so this was chapter 3. Next time we talk, when I'm inspired, I just want to put my head in a book. I'll go to chapter 4. I wish you so much love.